This year is different. So what's the biggest reason? How is it different the most today because of the early signing period?
Mainly because the majority of the ball players signed in December. About 80% of them are gone. So now it lays it down to 20%. I've been on the road the last 5.5 weeks actually interviewing 2019 players, but running into a lot of the coaches that are recruiting both 2018 2019. And there's sort of a frenetic kind of effort by these guys because there was such a smaller talent pool that everyone was just kind of jammed in together at different high schools trying to talk other people out of going here, going there, but not nearly as many they could talk out of because, as I said, 80% were gone. So it's a lot different. It's not nearly as big as the day was in December, actually. We didn't know that at the time. I think next year we won't be caught with our pants down because I think if they keep it the same way, I would imagine the majority of the players will once again sign in December.
So for fans, this might be a little deflating because today was kind of a national holiday for college football fans. As you mentioned now, it doesn't feel, it's kind of anticlimactic. But did it help the players? Did it help the coaches? Did it help college football to do it this way?
I think in the long run, yes. I think they're going to probably have to adjust the dates, maybe move it up to September 1st before the season starts. Because when you look at it now, they signed in mid-December. And then immediately there was a dead period for almost a month where the coaches couldn't do anything, couldn't talk, players couldn't come and see them, they couldn't talk. And that means they only really had 3 weeks to go after this 20% that are still left. And that's why everyone was just bouncing heads off each other because there was so little time to go get ball players, and they started trying to turn guys around. And there have been some. There's a big ball player that turned from Alabama to A&M today because he was not signed. But back in the old days, everyone, the entire group was not signed, so there were a lot of ball players flipping from one school to the other. You won't see that quite as much as today, and you won't see the near amount of ball players you've seen in the past sign. And what also happens is, and I've seen this in the past too, the ball players that are left become better ball players because there's more people coming after them. They go from maybe a 2-star to a 3-star, possibly even a 4-star, because everyone else is now trying to just fill out their roster, and they're putting all their effort into a couple of guys. And the internet sites make their money the last couple of weeks of recruiting by building these guys up into better ball players than they actually are. So you'll see a lot of ball players signing today. There are a few good ones left, but you'll see an awful lot of them that are signing today that that fans will think are much better than they actually are.
Tom Lemming, CBS Sports Network, recruiting coordinator, analyst, insider, joining us this morning on the show. One of the big stories has been the success of Tom Herman at Texas. A lot of in-state success in the Lone Star State heading into their burnt orange uniforms. Has that been one of the biggest storylines, and how did Tom Herman do it this offseason?
He's done very, very well, but that's to be expected. Mac Brown kind of set the tone with great recruiting, and it was followed up. Texas is really the school. I spent 10 days there about a month ago and driving and hitting the ball players, and still the fan base is still there for Texas, even much more so than A&M and a lot of the other top programs. A&M has a big fan base, but they're still really the state school. Like Ohio State is the state school, and like Georgia is really the state school when it comes to football. And I think that Texas they're now really flexing their muscles and starting to land a good number of the premier ball players. They got a guy, a defensive tackle, Keandre Coburn, today, finally signed with Texas. Everybody figured he might be heading that way, but they're having a great class. I've got them number 4 in the country right now behind Ohio State, Georgia, Penn State.
Well, there was some sense that because A&M had obviously gone to the SEC and because they have had some success with Johnny Manziel and because obviously Texas has been down, that the separation between the two schools was going to be lessening, and maybe A&M had even overtaken them in terms of recruiting. But this year suggests otherwise, right? It suggests that Texas is far ahead of A&M in recruiting?
Yes, far ahead this year, but you're right. In the past few years, A&M either was ahead of Texas or was probably a stalemate between the two. And I think this year Texas has proven themselves. Plus, with the coaching change, it's tough. A&M did get Trey Brown, the defensive end from the Metroplex, switched from Alabama to A&M today, which rarely happens. You rarely see Nick Saban get a guy that leaves them. Normally, he's the one doing the switching, so it is an unusual situation. But A&M, I think, will rebound next year and have one of those outstanding years. But I think if Texas does the job and does things right, they're always going to be in the top 10 because they really are. They've got more influence. They've got more contacts. they're really the state school in Texas.
Kirby Smart is kind of seen now as the challenger, the big challenger at Georgia to Alabama for SEC supremacy. With a run to the national championship game, their storylines this year, how has Georgia benefited from that type of success?
I have them number 2 to Ohio State, so they're doing fantastic. And Kirby Smart, what I had found out over the years, and I just spent a lot of time in Georgia the last week, he's loved already by the Georgia fans and the ball players. I think for them it's more of a selecting than actually recruiting right now. He put a fence around it. Coach Mark Richt was not able to quite do that. That's why Clemson won a national title, mainly with Georgia ball players, in my opinion. And now Kirby Smart's putting a fence around the state, and it looks like a good number. Just about every top player that he wants in the state is coming to Georgia. So I expect Georgia to be in the national title picture for the unforeseen future, really. I think for as long as he wants and as long as he continues to recruit the way Nick Saban taught him how to recruit, I think Georgia's going to be a powerhouse.
If you want to feel old, one of the best recruits still available right now, Patrick Surtain Jr., if you remember his dad, who was a cornerback in the NFL for years. He's looking at Alabama, Clemson, LSU, and Miami. He's from Plantation, Florida, in South Florida. Any sense of where he's going to choose?
I always figured this. I thought LSU all along, but a lot of people talk about Miami and Alabama. So he's been keeping it very much close to the vest, along with his teammate Tyson Campbell. But I had always thought at the time, for most of the year when I first ran into him earlier in the year, and a couple of years ago when I talked to him, LSU was the school, but obviously Miami is looming large, and we'll just have to wait and see for another hour, so he should be announcing pretty soon.
So for winners, you have to have Texas, Georgia, Ohio State. How about losers? Who hasn't done well in your mind?
Mainly the schools that lost head coaches this year, and that's kind of to be expected. I think you'll see some like Texas A&M is not really a loser. Michigan State kind of suffered because of all the negative press they've been getting the past month. That hurt them. People are saying that Michigan's a loser, but I think Michigan's doing an excellent job recruiting. They're in the top 15, but Harbaugh hasn't been out there as he had been the past couple of years, where really a lot of the focus was on the crazy things that he was doing. But I thought Michigan's putting together a decent year, not a top 10 year, but a top 20 year for sure. And the Florida Gators are slowly but surely inching their way back up. I thought they were going to have a poor year because of the coaching change, but they've done. Dan Mullen's an excellent recruiter, and even though they won't be top 10, I think they'll be within striking distance of the top 15.
How about UCF? Obviously a Cinderella story, and they have this amazing undefeated season, get a lot of national run. Did we see a bump from them in recruiting?
Well, we did until they lost their head coach. They were going to have a major bump.
Yeah.
And then he actually started going after the ball players that he was recruiting at UCF for Nebraska, some of them. But normally they're not going to, even when they're undefeated, they're not going to beat Florida State, or Miami in state. But they did get a major bump with this unbelievable season that they had. However, losing the coaching staff, it really kind of hurt them. So they went from possibly being a top 25 recruiting class to out of the top 25.
Lane Kiffin at FAU, did he turn some heads in recruiting?
He has. Lane's always been an excellent recruiter. Wherever Lane's been, he was always Pete Carroll along with Ed Orgeron. Pete Carroll's two right-hand men. And then he did a good job at Tennessee, did a good job wherever he's been. At Alabama, he was the one that brought in the number one player in the country last year, Najee Harris. So he's done very well. And you know what? He's in a hotbed of football talent. There's no better place in the country than South Florida when it comes to football talent. So he should do well. Again, he's not going to beat the major schools, but if you do a good job evaluating, you're going to always wind up with a good class and a very competitive team as well. FAU, FIU, USF, USF, and UCF. They all should do well because there's such an abundance of talent from Central Florida on down.
The same thing in California. So what's the Chip Kelly effect at UCLA?
So far, minimal. But I think next year, once he gets a full year after, he's going to do well. Right now, I would say UCLA, I would have them listed probably in the top 30, but closer to 30 than closer to 20. I think you'll see them change a little bit as they progress. But UCLA, there was no bump at all when it came to Chip Kelly coming in, and I think because of the lack of time.
Most of this decade, Alabama has won recruiting day, National Signing Day. Now it sounds like you've got Ohio State number 1, Georgia number 2. I assume you've got Alabama number 3. But is there now more challengers to Alabama's recruiting supremacy in the last couple of years?
Yeah, I have actually Alabama number 5. It's Ohio State, Georgia, Penn State, Texas, Alabama, and Notre Dame. That's really the way it's going. A lot of times you don't give credit to schools like Penn State, who has had a phenomenal year, really. I think when you look at it, and they've done very well in the past few years, but Penn State's having a great year. Alabama would have been – I can understand why Nick Saban was upset with the first signing period because, he was battling for a national title. So he's coaching his team. He had to spend some time out on the road. But with 80% of the ball players gone, it doesn't give them that big of a selection to wind up number 1 this year, and that's the reason why they didn't. I think if everything had been the same, Alabama would have been right in the mix and would have gotten some of the super players turned around and heading to Tuscaloosa. So I think next year he's going to have to adjust to that, and you'll see Alabama back in the top 3.
College football fans, following National Signing Day, will follow Tom Lemming on Twitter, @Lemming Report, for the latest today on National Signing Day. Obviously, go to CBSSports.com as well for the latest there also throughout the day. Tom, it's always fun to catch up, man. Enjoy the day. I appreciate the time.
Hey, my pleasure. Anytime. Take care.
Okay, Tom Lemming joining us here on the show.